One of the greatest barriers that job creation has today is regulatory uncertainty. Small businesses already bear a heavy regulatory burden. Overreaching new proposed regulations are having a chilling effect, prolonging the economic downturn that we're experiencing in our country. Today we will examine the U.S. Department of Agriculture's proposed grain inspection, Packers and Stockyards Administration, or the GIPSA rule, and the potential ramifications it will have on America's small businesses. I would like to extend special thanks to each of our witnesses here today for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. And I'd like to especially thank the folks from the USDA and Undersecretary Avalos for being here. I also want to extend a warm welcome to Robbie LaValle, a constituent of mine from Hotchkiss, Colorado, who we will hear testimony from later, along with other representatives for small businesses within the beef, pork, and poultry industries. Just over a year ago, the USDA announced a proposed rule that would significantly alter livestock marketing practices and further inject the government into small businesses' marketing and business decisions. If implemented as proposed, this overreaching new rule would hurt thousands of small businesses in the livestock industry and cost our country thousands of jobs. The GIPSA rule would create uncertainty for livestock producers and open the door for frivolous lawsuits based on nothing more than accusations of competitive injury. Further, although the rule was prompted by the 2008 Farm Bill, I believe what was proposed by the USDA went far beyond the intent of Congress. The proposed rule has raised concerns for many in the agricultural community. During the public comment period, the USDA received more than 61,000 comments from stakeholders in the beef, pork, and poultry industries. Despite the proposed rule's potential for having far-reaching impacts on small businesses, no comprehensive cost-benefit analysis was performed. Chairman Graves and I found the USDA's disregard for the Regulatory Flexibility Act extremely troubling. As a result, last month we sent a letter to the USDA Secretary Tom Vislak, expressing our concerns and calling for, among other things, a revised regulatory flexibility analysis to ensure that the USDA fully understands the private sector costs of regulations in its imposing these new rules on small businesses. Independent studies estimate that the proposed rule would deal a $1.5 billion blow to our nation's economy and directly cause a loss of 23,000 jobs. Clearly, our country cannot afford further economic injury of this magnitude. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses as they provide testimony and seek to prevent regulatory injuries that will likely result by implementation of the existing proposed rule. I also look forward to hearing from Undersecretary Avalos on the current status of the proposed rule. It is my hope that if the USDA moves forward on the proposed rule, it will do so only after significantly revising the rule to address the concerns raised here today and to incorporate the suggestions from those who commented on the rule. I would also encourage the USDA to consider and include in the record the letter of Chairman Graves and I sent to Secretary Vislak on June 13th and address the inadequacies of the agency's initial regulatory flexibility analysis and the potential ramifications on small businesses. Again, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today, and I will now yield to Ranking Member Kritz for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Christian, thank you for being here. Over the past 60 years, technological improvements and scientific breakthroughs have enabled our farms to become the most productive in the world. However, the dramatic expansion of industrial agriculture has also made it increasingly challenging for small family farms to thrive. One area that has factored into this trend has been consolidation and vertical integration of the meat and poultry industry. Compared to 20 years ago, the cattle industry is roughly 40% more concentrated. The modern poultry industry is 67% more concentrated than 2 decades ago. These trends have profoundly affected how small farms operate. As industry consolidation reduced the number of outlets for agricultural products, many family farms have shifted toward contract production. In addition, market forces have strained the bottom line of many farmers. Congress recognized this and took steps to address these concerns in the 2008 Farm Bill. That measure contains provisions to improve marketing practices, including new rules for production contracts. The bill required the Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, GIPSA, to define anti-competitive practices with the goal of improving oversight and compliance. Last June, GIPSA published its proposed rule intended to bring transparency to the industry and help small family farms compete. Today, we will examine how effective this proposal is in restoring a competitive balance to the meat and poultry industries. The subcommittee will also be investigating the economic costs on small and medium-sized farms. I look forward to any suggestions our witnesses may have for improving the regulation before the USDA issues its final rule. While the goal of the rulemaking is to help level the playing field, it is imperative that USDA properly weigh any adverse economic impact and explore less burdensome alternatives. I am confident after this hearing the USDA will continue to proceed in a transparent manner that allows public comments to the proposal as well as the pending economic analysis. This input must be fully considered before a final rule is issued. Independent family farms play a vital role in rural economies. In addition to providing jobs, family farmers also help support small businesses by purchasing goods and services within their communities. Without them, rural areas are left with higher rates of unemployment and little opportunity for economic growth. It is vitally important that firms who will be directly impacted by the changes are heard. In advance of the testimony, I want to thank all the witnesses who traveled here today, including Bob Junk from my congressional district, for their participation and insights into this important topic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Kretz. And I would ask if committee members have a statement that they submit it for the record. And gentlemen, you're probably familiar with it, but if I may take a moment to explain our lighting system. You'll have 5 minutes for your testimony. When the light turns yellow, you have 1 minute left, and if you exceed that a little bit, if you'd wrap up your comments as quickly as possible and we can proceed on with questions from the committee, we would appreciate it. Our first panel today, we will hear testimony from the Honorable Edward Avalos, Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs for the USDA. And Mr. Secretary, I want to certainly let you know that we do appreciate your having reached out to our office, and I know the other members as well. Mr. Avalos provides leadership and oversight for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, which addresses animal and plant pests and diseases. The Agricultural Marketing Service, which provides standardization, testing, and marketing of commodities and specialty crops and grain inspection. Packers and Stockyard Administration, which promotes marketing of livestock, cereals, and meats, as well as fair trade practices. Mr. Avalos grew up in a family farm in Melissa Valley of southern New Mexico. And Mr. Avalos is joined by Mr. Alan Christian, Deputy Administrator at Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, GIPSA. And I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for taking the time to be here today. Mr. Avalos, if you would begin with your testimony. Thank you.
Chairman Tipton, Ranking Member Kretz, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the proposed rule issued by the Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, better known as GIPSA, on June 22, 2010. While I'm looking forward to getting into the important small business perspectives from members of this committee, I'm limited by the Administrative Procedures Act and USDA's ex parte guidelines of what I can discuss at this stage of the rulemaking. Before I talk about the proposed rule, let me provide some context. It's very appropriate for the Small Business Committee to decide to focus on this hearing on small business in the livestock and poultry industries. The vast majority of farmers in general, specifically livestock and poultry producers, are small businesses. There are currently 70,000 hog producers in this country, almost 1 million cattle ranchers in the country, and nearly 20,000 poultry growers. The majority of these individuals are family-owned small businesses. I think the point that farmers, ranchers, livestock producers, poultry growers, are small businesses is important to note. As you all know, small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy and where jobs are created and where new ideas are developed. The Secretary and I have long recognized the importance of farmers, ranchers, and producers to rural communities. Our livestock and poultry producers benefit rural communities because they also support other small local businesses, such as the local hardware store, the feed store, local restaurants, the local tractor farm implement dealers. A primary mission of GIPSA, and in particular Packers Stockyards program, is to make sure that the marketplace is fair and transparent, ensuring small businesses get a fair shake. Decades before the Small Business Administration was formed and the importance of small business was really fully recognized, the predecessor of GIPSA was created by Congress through the Packers and Stockyards Act in 1921. This was largely done to protect small businesses, that is, livestock producers and ranchers, against abuses of market power by large meat packers. Packers Stockyards Act, which is the basis for GIPSA's enforcement authority in the livestock and poultry industry, is 90 years old this year. These industries have changed dramatically over time. For example, stockyards are virtually non-existent today. This longevity means the regulations and the Act itself need to be updated periodically. Congress realized this in the 2008 Farm Bill by making some changes in the Act and directing USDA to propose specific regulations. Combined with a handful of additional areas that USDA felt deserved closer attention and needed input from stakeholders, this was the genesis of the rulemaking that is the subject of this hearing today. The purpose of the proposed rule was to make the markets more fair and transparent, which was intended to benefit livestock producers and poultry growers, the vast majority of which are family-owned businesses. This is in no way to minimize concerns about potential unintended consequences of the proposed rule, either generally or related to small businesses. For example, I know there are various concerns that were raised about the rule hindering value-added and other market activities. I want to make clear to you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee, that our intent and intent of the Secretary and myself, that we are very strong supporters of these marketing arrangements. These arrangements that often provide premiums to farmers and ranchers at the same time meet consumer demand. We received over 61,000 comments. These comments were comprehensive, thoughtful, and educational. We view these comments as tools that will guide us on our path to make the appropriate needed reforms. It is important to us to have a workable and common sense rule. These comments will assist the Department to determine if all factors have been properly considered. The comments will also aid us to develop a more rigorous cost-benefit analysis, such as and other related analysis, such as a small business analysis. While it would not be appropriate to go into detail on specific modifications, I can assure you that the Department will take careful account of the public comments. We ask that everyone have patience as we carefully work through the comments, and we ask that we not prejudge the outcome. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about this proposed rule and share our support for small businesses in rural America. I welcome your questions and your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And we'll now proceed with the questioning for Secretary Avalos, and I'll begin. And I think that's important to probably note, and I think you brought up a very important word in intent. We've seen some good cooperative work with the USDA, of course. And I'm encouraged to hear that you are taking into consideration the 61,000 comments that came into play, particularly as it gets down to some of the cost-benefit analysis. Mr. Secretary, in recent testimony before the Senate Agricultural Committee, the USDA Chief Economist Joe Glauber stated that the Department's economic analysis of the rule is difficult given how the regulations could affect behavior by packers and interrogators and how they do business. Given that the Department has now admitted that the rule would have a significant economic impact, will the findings of the economic analysis result in the Department undertaking a new regulatory flexibility analysis?
Congressman, first I want to, or I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, first I want to say that this administration is strongly committed to helping small business, and we strongly support transparency, fairness, and equity in the marketplace. This is really, really important to us. The comments that we received on the proposed rule, they bring up some of these concerns that you just talked about on the small business analysis that Dr. Glauber was talking about. And I guess, once again, what I'm asking is that we have patience, let the time-tested rulemaking process continue, and I can assure you that we are going to listen to these comments, the comments on the cost-benefit analysis that was in the proposed rule, the comments that were on the small business analysis. And I can assure you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that Dr. Glauber, our chief economist, will have, well, first of all, he will lead the team to develop the cost-benefit analysis, but just as important, he will have considerable input on how this impacts small business.
One question, I guess, that I'm curious about, Mr. Secretary, is once we've taken into consideration those 61,000 comments, and we have that patience, before the rule goes final, will there be a general review coming back to Congress?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this process has really been tedious, and it's a new process for me. Coming from New Mexico, I've never been exposed to something like this, and sometimes you really try your patience. But we received all these comments, okay, and then we summarized them, and now we put them in category as to how they impact on specific provisions of the proposed rule. And anyway, having done all that, we're now looking at options, at alternatives. We're looking at possible modifications. And I just don't want to prejudge the rulemaking process. So I can't tell you, what the end product's going to be. Mm-hmm. Okay, I can't tell you, what kind of form the end product will have, and I can't tell you if we're going to have additional comments or not.
As mentioned in the comments from Chairman Graves and myself, the Department's information gathering on small businesses appeared to be inadequate. What procedures will the Department have in place to better measure, number one, the scope of small businesses potentially being impacted, and how these businesses would be impacted compared to their larger rivals?
Mr. Chairman, once again, were you making reference to the letter that came into the Secretary?
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to acknowledge and to appreciate the considerable thought and effort that was put into the letter. This was really important, but it did have some specific requests and recommendations, and due to the Administrative Procedures Act, I can't discuss right now. But I can tell you this: most of the requests that were in the letter also came up in the comments on the rule and are being considered. I can also tell you that these concerns, requests are on my mind because of how they impact on small businesses, how they impact on growers and producers all over the country. And maybe I should share a story with you, Mr. Chairman. The reason it's on my mind, what's important to me, I, in the past, worked a lot with the livestock industry, did a lot of work to export livestock into Mexico, and I still have friends all over the United States. And in particular, I had an old friend from, of all places, from Tulia, Texas. They called me up about the proposed rule. And I told them, well, I can't talk about it, but I told him one thing. He was concerned about his operation, how he was getting a premium for his cattle. Small operator, 300 mother cows, part owner of a feedlot, but because of the quality of his cattle, he got a premium. And he was concerned about losing that premium. So I told him, just like I said in my statement, Secretary Vilsack and I strongly support value added. We strongly support marketing arrangements, strongly support premiums to producers that produce high quality cattle. So anyway, going back to your question, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, no option is being ruled out. We are really focused on the issues and concerns. We are taking these comments very serious. And I can assure you that at the end of the day, we will fully comply with the provisions of the Farm Bill, the provisions of the Packing Stockyards Act, Administrative Procedures Act, and the Regulatory Flexibility Act.
Mr. Abbott, you and I are probably two of the only people in this room that know where Tulia, Texas actually is. And, you know, we come from rural America. I'm out of Colorado, and we're actually neighbors pretty close. But during a recent Ag Committee subcommittee meeting, you had stated that you wanted to repopulate rural America as a result of the implementation of the proposed rule. And as I mentioned in my statement, independent studies estimate that the proposed rule would deal $1.5 billion blow to our nation's economy and directly cause the loss of about 23,000 jobs. The majority of these job losses will be found, obviously, in rural America, given the nature of this. And how is this going to help really repopulate rural America?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate those comments because rural America is very important, not only to me, but to Secretary Vilsack and to the administration. You know, this administration has made revitalizing rural America a priority, keeping farmers and ranchers on the farm and on the ranch a priority. The intent of this proposed rule was to maintain fairness, transparency, equity in the marketplace. The intent was not to hurt producers. Once again, I'll refer back to the 60,000 plus comments that we received. A lot of these concerns were raised in the comments. And again, we're taking these comments very serious. We're not leaving out any options. And as we move forward, the comments will guide us.
Yeah. You know, under the proposed rule, it will be necessary for small packers to determine and document the benefits of contractual terms in order to satisfy the record-keeping requirements that are mandated. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure we get a correct answer to you, so I'm going to defer to Mr. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the intent of the rule was to provide a fair and transparent market for producers, and in particular small producers, that over the years we've heard from don't feel that they have the same access to those markets as some of the larger producers. And so the intent of that provision and others, you know, similar to it, was to provide that level playing field, if you will, and some transparency so they know what type of mechanisms or marketing arrangements are available for them.
Okay, well, when we're talking about those calculations, to whom are the benefits to be calculated? The packers, producers, consumers? What's kind of the matrix?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman,
on that, in terms of who are the benefits when we're talking about when those are going to be calculated out? Are the benefits going to be to the packer, the consumers, the producers?
In the cost-benefit analysis?
Yes.
Well, I think that it varies depending on, you know, the particular provision. And Dr. Glauber, you know, with the Chief Economist's Office is, in fact, you know, as we speak, undertaking the cost-benefit analysis for the rule based on the comments that we received.
I just have one final question here. Has GIPSA considered the cost for a small packer to engage separate packer buyers for each auction barn with which it currently does business?
Mr. Chairman, I I think that's probably getting into the specifics of the rule. But I do know that that's been brought up in the comments. And once again, I'm asking for your patience and the patience of the committee and the stakeholders to let this rulemaking process continue, and let us focus on these issues and concerns that were brought up in the comments, and let us address them. And I can assure you that at the end, the final product, whatever form it is, will take into consideration all these very important comments that we've received.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to now yield to Ranking Member Kritz for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as you mentioned in your statement and as you've been detailing, there's been a consolidation in livestock, there's been a consolidation in pork and in poultry over the last 10 to 20 years. Can you, and I guess in a way of explanation, I'm new to this process, just elected last year, so I'm trying to get up to speed as much as possible. I've written to the Secretary Vilsack about the economic impact of the rule. Can you detail what prompted initially this analysis for GIPSA, and then tell me about a timeline going forward as well?
Okay, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, your question was on what prompted the cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah. No. With the consolidation, and I guess going further, there's a lot of talk about loss of jobs that GIPSA will impart. My concern is in, my part of the world, I have a lot of small farmers. So what I'm asking is, what has been the impact on small farmers because of this consolidation over the years that prompted this revisiting of GIPSA?
Congressman, as I mentioned in the opening statement, the Packers and Stockyards Act is 90 years old.
Right.
And I'll go back to advice I received from my dad a long time ago when I was just a young man, and we moved. You'll appreciate this, Mr. Chairman. We moved from the farm to town, to the city, and I wasn't very happy. And my dad sat me down and said, look, son, in this world, everything is always changing. Nothing ever stays the same. You need to adjust to survive. I think this applies with the Packers Stockyards Act. It's 90 years old. The industry has changed tremendously in 90 years, and we're having to make adjustments to the regulations to keep up with the industry, to address the needs of the industry, whether it be the packer or the producer. So anyway, this need for change, for modification, is really what prompted these changes to the act, to the law. And I'm going to, just to make sure we answer your question, Congressman, I'm going to defer to Mr. Christian. Maybe he can help me out a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, Congressman, I think, if you look over the last, say, 20 years, you go back to the 90s, there's been, as you mentioned, a very significant decrease in the number of farmers. If you look at, cattle, you're going from, say, 1.2 million to under 1 million. You've got 250,000 hog producers. Now you're down to around under 70,000. And even livestock markets, you're going from about 1,800 livestock markets now down to about 1,200 livestock markets. And I'm sure there's many factors that have contributed to that decline. But one of the things that we hear all the time from small farmers, and really the smallest of small business, is that they can't compete in the marketplace. I mean, we've heard from small poultry growers that they've invested a substantial amount of money, $500,000 to $1 million, and they've got a contract that they've entered into freely to raise poultry for a large integrator, and then after a short period of time, the integrator comes back and changes their contract, maybe from a 3-year contract to a flock-to-flock contract. And the grower at that point really is under a contract of adhesion and has no ability to then bargain. So we've heard those kind of issues from small growers. From small hog producers, I mean, we've heard that There are cost-plus contracts in the industry. There are ledger contracts in the industry. But a lot of these contracts that provide some type of financial protection are available to the large producers and are not available, even if the small producer can meet those terms, are not available to that person. So we've taken, those concerns into account as we have developed this proposed rule, and the intent of the rule is then to provide at least a more transparent marketplace and a fairer marketplace where the small producers can at least see what is available and have an opportunity then to compete for those marketing arrangements.
So we're looking to become more transparent to give the small producers a seat at the table, and I guess a fair chance to compete for contracts. And this comes back to, I think, the letter that the Chairman and Chairman Graves had sent, and that I had talked about actually in a letter that I sent last year about the economic impact. And, obviously in this country, we like everything as cheap as possible. And I'm assuming that with vertical integration, it keeps the price compressed, which dealing in the world of subcontracting, I know that it's the guy at the bottom of the rung that usually feels the pinch the hardest. Now, I don't know from your seat if you've seen, you talked about the loss of farms, small producers over the years. What's the time, I guess you could, I'm asking, on I think we've all asked for an economic impact of what this rule change would do. Where in process are we with getting an answer on the economic impact?
Congressman, as we all know, the Secretary directed our Chief Economist, Dr. Glauber, to lead a team of economists at USDA to conduct a very thorough and comprehensive cost-benefit analysis and economic analysis. I don't know exactly where we are in the process. I know that the team has been working very hard on this, and I know that it's taken considerable time because of the extent of the comments, and the comments received on the proposal they're being used as guidance in preparing this cost-benefit analysis. So I can't give you a timeline as to where we are, but I can tell you that Dr. Glauber and the team are working very hard on this.
Okay, well, and that brings me to my next question. And obviously, those of us up here, we get a 2-year contract every 2 years, so time is very important to us. From the testimony and from the information I received, the comment period ended on November 22nd, which is about 32 weeks ago. 61,000 comments. One person going through 400 comments a week on a 5-day work week could have covered that. So if you've got 10 people, that's only 4. So I'm curious, where are we in process? You talked about putting these in silos or categorizing them. How close are we to coming up with some sort of guidance that those of us, and obviously being on the Small Business and the Subcommittee on Agriculture, this is extremely important to us because we all represent small producers, but we also live in this large economy that we have to figure out where the balance is.
Congressman, I wish I could just give you an answer, but it's a hard question to answer because I don't know when we're going to have a final product. Like I mentioned earlier, now we've got them.
Can you tell me how many people are working on it?
I cannot, but I can defer to Mr. Christian. He might know how many folks are working on this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Congressman. The GIPSA is a very small organization. The Packers and Stockyards program is 160 people. The rules that we work on typically receive anywhere from 20 to a couple hundred comments. We've leveraged people from outside of the agency from the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to help us review these comments. We've been working as hard as we possibly can with the few amount of people that we have to get this completed. And I can assure you Dr. Glauber, the Chief Economist's office, is working very diligently to get the cost-benefit analysis completed. And I think, that's a key piece. Once we get the cost-benefit analysis, then that gives us, a lot of information to look at the options that are available to move forward.
So are we looking at, now it's been 7 months, within a year of the close, November 22nd, 2011, I mean, can you even ballpark it that we're close or we have several months to go? And I don't mean to be pushy about this, but and I think the Chairman mentioned it, is that uncertainty creates issues for a lot of people. And at least if you know where you are, you know how you can compete or how you can't compete. And I think that this is creating some uncertainty within all levels of this marketplace.
Congress, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I wanted to add a little something, then I'll try to give you a more direct answer. On the comments that we received, they weren't just I'm for the rule, against the rule. The people, the stakeholders that took time and expense to submit their comments, which we greatly, greatly appreciate, were very comprehensive. They gave alternatives, recommendations, options, very, very thorough. So it's not you just read them and say, this guy's for them, this guy's against them. It's really a very, very time-consuming, thorough process, very, very important process. So to answer your question on the timeline, fairly soon we should have a final product.
Fairly soon. Okay.
Fairly soon.
That's hopeful. It's summer. We'll see where that takes us. One thing and it's something Mr. Christian just mentioned about the size of GIPSA. Now, with this proposed rule, you're talking about a more transparent process, but you're also talking about more enforcement. What does that mean to your level of staffing? If you're already a small organization, how do you then populate to do enforcement of some of these issues? And I think the Chairman had mentioned about, there's a worry about frivolous lawsuits. And I think if you look across our legal system, I think anyone can find different areas where there's frivolous lawsuits. Hopefully farming would be, and livestock would be one of those areas that would be immune to it, but we're not that lucky. So how is this playing into the size of your operation?
Well, I think, obviously implementing new regulations requires an extra effort. I have a kind of a theory of, I've been working in regulatory enforcement for about my entire career. I have a theory, everybody's heard of the 80-20 rule, and it sort of applies to enforcement. If you let folks know what the requirements are, about 80% will voluntarily comply. About 2% will never comply. And so you focus your efforts first on education to get the industry up to that 80%, and then you focus your limited resources on enforcement of that 2%, so you can get the other 18% to understand that it'd be better to comply than to not comply. And so that's how GIPSA really, or the Packers and Stockyards program, is implemented. I mean, we really just spot check. We make sure that people understand what the rules are in the industry the best we can by getting folks out there, by working with industry, and then we identify the flagrant violators, because we can't look over everybody's shoulder, and we try to take strong enforcement action against those flagrant violators to set up the deterrence to get that compliance rate up. And one of the areas that's of concern, because our overall goal, our measure, is compliance. If we can get 100% or 90-some% compliance with the Packers and Stockyards Act and the regulations that were promulgated under it, and if it's a good law and if they're good regulations, then we'll have done our job. We'll have protected livestock producers, livestock sellers. What we found in poultry, with the limited regulations that are in poultry right now, our compliance rate is still down around 67% when we're looking at contract compliance. And what I think will happen if these rules are promulgated in a way that helps provide guidance to the industry as to what we consider compliance under an unfair practice or an unreasonable preference, that it will help the industry get that compliance rate up, to over 80%, and help improve the protections then for poultry growers and, the small entities that are out there.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I see you have actually a full slate of folks on your side, so I'll yield back so that they can get to their questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Bartlett for his questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Christian, would you tell us why our small businesses and our farmers think that they're going to be hurt by this proposed rule? And after you have done that, then I would like the Secretary to tell us why they're wrong.
Well, Congressman, I think, to look at the response that we've gotten to the proposed rule, the 61,000 comments, will give you an idea of how people feel about the rule and how they feel.
But how do they think it's going to hurt them? What do they think it's going to do to them?
Well, I mean, looking at the comments, there's a wide range of issues that different entities of different sizes have.
Tell us some of those, if you would.
Would you like me to reiterate what some of the comments have indicated?
Yeah, I'm sure you can categorize them, and just a few of the
We've received
the biggest plurality of hits. Well,
in the rulemaking process, the number of comments aren't necessarily as relevant as the substantive nature of the comment. And so, I mean, in terms of numbers, we received a lot of postcards. We received a lot of emails. I mean, we received probably...
Of the substantive comments, why do they think this rule is going to hurt them? What will it do to them?
Well, in terms of costs, we've identified in the cost-benefit analysis adjustment costs. We've identified analysis costs, and those were identified and expounded on in the comments that we received. In fact, we asked for, in the comments, information on cost-benefit and information on the effect on small business, a number of times in our preamble.
This is, I gather, an unprecedented number of responses. Am I correct? Pretty much unprecedented.
For GIPSA?
Yes.
For the Packers and Stockyards program.
So there must be some real major concerns out there. I'm still having some trouble understanding what those major concerns are. What do they think this rule is going to do to them? Why did 80,000 of them, you say, respond to you? Gee, we think this is a bad idea. Give me just a couple of the reasons that they think this is going to hurt them. So far, you've just given me very generic things that I can't get my teeth into.
Well, I mean, there were a little over 60,000 comments, and there were comments for the rule, there were comments opposed to the rule, there were comments suggesting modifications or changes to the rule, and we're considering every single one of those comments seriously as we move forward with the process.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us some of their major concerns and why you think they're wrong, or if they may be right and you're going to fix it?
Congressman, appreciate your persistence, and I really want to give you a direct answer, but because of the ex parte, I can't get into the specifics of the proposed rule. But I can give you a perspective coming from the countryside, working with farmers and ranchers all my life. This is a proposed rule, something so different. Haven't had a change in this law in 90 years at this magnitude. So there's concern. There's concern just because it's a new regulation coming from the government. They're concerned about their impact on their livelihood, on their farm and ranch operation, the future of their kids. So once again, I can't give you the specifics that you can put your teeth in, but I can assure you Congressman, that these comments that we received, their concerns are expressed in those comments, and we're taking those comments very serious.
Oh, thank you. I'm still having trouble understanding what their major concerns with the. There must have been enough specifics in your announcement of this proposed rule that it really stirred them up, and I'm having trouble understanding what those specifics were that they became so agitated. You got what, more than 50,000 responses?
Congressman, I wouldn't say they became agitated, because I can tell you this: of the comments, and I want to make sure that the committee, Mr. Chairman, the committee knows that I did take time to read some of these comments. I promised, there's a gentleman here from NCBA that I visited with earlier. I promised the then president of NCBA that I would read their comments, and I did. And very thorough, very comprehensive, and it's pretty tough reading, okay? And I also read some comments from some of the other groups that came in, and it's tough reading. But they're not agitated. It's just something that's so different, so new, and they want to make sure that they understand what's being proposed. So they're asking questions. They're supplying alternatives, options. But keep in mind also, Congressman, that not everyone was upset or agitated. A lot of people were really pleased that these changes were being proposed. So it's a group of stakeholders that submitted some very thorough comments and made some very good recommendations, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do thank the witnesses, and Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your demeanor here. And a little about your background is interesting to me. That growing up in the country and having to make that adjustment, I think that was an interesting narrative. Can you just give me a few seconds on what the family farm or ranch operation was like? Did you have a family there, brothers and sisters also you grew up with, and you all had to be relocated to the city?
Congressman, I can. You know, I've always said that I grew up on a family farm, but I usually don't get the opportunity to explain the rest of the story. That family farm was not my family's farm. We were the labor on that farm. Now, I had relatives that owned farms nearby, but my dad was injured in an accident, a tractor accident on the farm, and we had to relocate to the city. And it's really, really tough, Congressman, when you grow up as a little kid. You run around barefooted all day long on the farm, you're around cattle, you're around all the different crops, to all of a sudden move into a city where it's a strange world. So it was a major adjustment. That's why my dad understood that it was so different for me, having come from the farm.
Do you have siblings also that?
And I do. But one thing that I wanted to emphasize to you, Congressman, and the committee, agriculture is so important to me. It didn't matter that we were the labor on the farm. It was so important to me because it gave me a work ethic. I remember being in town, and I was a big kid, pretty athletic. And I was on the football team and the basketball team, and I used to run the hurdles. And I remember all the city kids, they go lift weights, go hang out at the swimming pool. I go back to the farm and harvest onions all summer.
That'll
harvest
get you
chili
in shape,
peppers all
Secretary.
summer.
I appreciate that. I know that the chair has been lenient with the clock, or I probably would have focused this a little bit more. I just, as you talk about the tractor accident of your father, I just happen to think that as we sit here now, there's a funeral going on for one of my neighbors and friends who was killed in a tractor accident, and I regret I'm not able to be there today. Those things do happen on the farm. It's a dangerous place to work, and I'm interested in that background because it informs you in the job that you do, and I normally don't ask those kind of questions either. But I noticed that in both your testimony and that of Mr. Christian, the word fairness comes up over and over again. I mean, the effort in this GIPSA rule is to provide fairness. And so could you provide for this committee a definition of the word fairness?
Well, I didn't come prepared to give you a definition for fairness, But
if that's the motivator for this rule, that should be something that's pretty clear.
And I can give you my perspective, not an official definition, but my perspective is that in any type of transaction, there's two sides. And I just feel that fairness is where both sides are treated fairly.
Okay, but you grew up on a farm with parents and siblings and all of you working together. Did you ever hear any of them say, that's not fair? And that was...
Absolutely not. You're right. Absolutely.
And so does anyone that grew up in a family with 2 or more kids understand that there's no such thing as fair in a family like that?
Well, again, fairness from what perspective?
Well, and that's right, and that is my point. And this is being driven, I don't know if the President's involved, it's being driven by the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack. It's being driven by some interests out there that think they're not being treated fairly in contracts. And I've been involved in a lot of contracts over the years, and I've heard people use that word fair, but it never really got us to a resolution. I see it scattered throughout the legal language in this Congress. It's scattered throughout the code of the U.S. Code and through the states. And I will tell you, I can define the state fair. I can define a county fair, but I can't define fair. And if fair is our guideline here, it is in the perspective of whoever is advocating. And I'll say from this perspective that if you have someone who raises premium line of hogs and they go negotiate a contract to be paid that premium, and they're producing that high-quality product for a niche market, and the packer is anticipating that load a week or whatever it is that they've agreed to do coming in, and they get paid a premium on the other end, it's not fair to say to that producer and that packer that the government is going to intervene in that contract. Who can determine what's fair? Can government bureaucrats determine a contract can determine if a contract's fair, or does it turn into the government deciding it's not fair that someone raises a premium product and the other person doesn't, and they don't get paid the same amount? It's about the equivalent of 4-H giving participation ribbons instead of blue and red ribbons instead. We've got to have competition in this marketplace. And my argument would be that if people think it's not fair, why don't they get in and compete with those? What keeps them out of that marketplace? If they believe they are locked out of the market, start your own packing plant, start your own business, open your own niche market, run the locker plant and expand it into a franchise, come to this Congress and ask us to allow them to sell meat across state lines so that people can actually penetrate into this marketplace. I think we're on the wrong path here. I think we're on a path that sets up the government to be setting prices in the terms of approving or disapproving of contracts. If the variance goes outside of the government's variance, then government has to approve the contract. And what are they doing intervening themselves in between a producer and a packer who have 2 consenting adults, have reached an agreement, and now the government says, well, it's not fair to somebody else? I can tell you that as a young man, I delivered hogs to the packing plant for a fellow that I worked for, and there might be a 300-pounder in there might be a 160-pounder in there, and a 220-pounder in there, in a pickup with a stock rack, waiting in line with pot trailers where every hog was uniform size and weight and easy for the packer to handle. Now, don't we know that even if I had one hog in that pickup truck that was the same profile, I'll call it, of all those hogs on that pot trailer, is that hog worth as much to the packer as the whole pack load or the whole truckload? Those are the kind of things that the government is seeking to interject themselves into. And if we're going to be a free market economy, then we have to let the market settle this. And I don't think government can determine fairness any more than your father, whom I know that you respect and hold in high esteem and raised you, could broker that and have all of the siblings agree that he had come down in a fair decision. I don't want the government to be the nanny state. And I just give you an opportunity to respond to what I said, and then I'd yield to Chairman. I've abused my privilege here, but I'm sorry about that.
Mr. Congressman, I appreciate your comments. They're good comments. But by the same token, I can't get into the detail of the proposed rule. But I lost my train of thought. But anyway, those are good comments, and I appreciate this. And I've had similar conversations with producers throughout the country. But I just feel that we still need to let this process continue because we have to respect all those comments that came in. And there's comments similar to the concerns that you just expressed and the comments you just made. And we're going to take those into consideration as we move forward. Now, I'm going to ask if my partner here, or Deputy Administrator Christian, would like to expand on this. Thank you.
Well, Congressman, I think, the issue that you've raised is the question that a lot of people have asked us as well. The Packers and Stockyards Act has included the word unfair practices, since the beginning, and a lot of people have asked, what does that mean? And so I think one of the things that you saw in this proposed rule was to try to provide some clarity as to what an unfair practice is, to help provide that guidance, to the marketplace as to determine, okay, what is unfair and what is not. So that was part of the intent of the proposed rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Elmers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions, and thank you for coming today. And actually, I would like for both of you to weigh in on these. And I know that you have basically stated that you're not necessarily discussing some of the actual rule positions, basically, as it is. But I am curious again, and I know this question's been asked already. I'm just curious about the timeline. What, I know you are still receiving comments now?
Congresswoman, no, the comment period's over.
It's okay, but and the comments are being reviewed.
Absolutely, Congresswoman. The question that we receive all the time is, when is this process going to end? Mm-hmm. When are we going to have a final product? And I appreciate that very, very much, but and I was pleasantly surprised, or maybe not pleasantly surprised, when I came to work at USDA. I didn't realize what everyone had to go through to go through the rulemaking process. This was really new to me, mm-hmm. and it was a surprise to me. But
I think you may have, this question may have already been posed, I'm not sure, but how many people are working on this? How many USDA staff are reviewing the comments and coming up with kind of a...
Congresswoman, I can't tell you exactly how many, but we have contracted outside the agency for assistance. But I'm not sure if you were here when a similar question was asked. That, we received these 60,000 plus comments. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we summarized them, and we put them in a category based on how they address specific provisions of the proposed rule. And then now we're looking at alternatives, at options that have been proposed, and it just takes a long time.
Also, and there again, that gives me as much information as I need. I do want to ask about the economic analysis of the proposed rule. Will that information be released? My understanding is you have done an economic analysis.
Congresswoman, in the proposed rule, there was an economic analysis, cost-benefit analysis, and we have received quite a few comments on the costs. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned earlier, our chief economist is leading a team, is preparing a very thorough cost-benefit analysis that will be in the final product. Right now, it's really too early to prejudge what the final product is going to look like. And I want to emphasize to you, Congresswoman, and to the committee that based on the comments, no option is going to be ignored. We're going to look at any possible option. And it's really too early right now in the process to one, give you a timeline and to tell you if we're going to, what we're going to do with the final product, and if we're going to have it.
Will you allow for public comments on that? I mean, we have submitted a letter, many of my colleagues, myself and 146 other members
Congressman,
asked for this.
absolutely. I'm real familiar with the letter.
Okay.
But on the comments, it's too early now to determine if we're going to have another comment period, because we don't really know what the final product is going to look like.
Okay. Have you spoken to stakeholders about how the rule may impact their businesses, and if so, have you spoken to those in North Carolina?
Congressman, we haven't since the comment period opened, and now that we're after the comment period trying to draft the final product. We can't talk directly to stakeholders to tell them about what we might propose, what we might not propose. Mm-hmm. However, I have spoken a lot with stakeholders. As part of my job, I've been keynote speaker at sheep industry groups, cattle growers, and of course the question always comes up on the proposed rule. And I can't get into specifics with them, but one thing that I have told them, one thing that comes up all the time is premiums to producers. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I can say, and I always tell them that the Secretary and I strongly support value added, we strongly support marketing arrangements, we strongly support premiums being paid to producers.
I have one more question, and I asked the chairman if I know I'm about ready to run out of time here, if that would be all right. And I'll direct this to Mr. Christian. It is a specific question. In the proposed rule, GIPSA is attempting to overturn numerous judicial decisions by providing that this is a quote, finding that the challenged act or practice adversely affects or is likely to adversely affect competition is not necessary in all cases, end quote. Basically, the way that I interpret that is that the plaintiff would now not necessarily have to show actual harm when challenging a packer activity. Is this correct? Is this basically the interpretation of that?
That is somewhat correct. The Department's longstanding position is that to prove a violation of the two sections of the Packers and Stockyards Act that apply to packers and swine contractors, that would be 202A and 202B, the unfair practice section and the unreasonable preference section, that in some cases you do not need to show competitive harm to prove a violation. An example might be if someone is fraudulently weighing your livestock at the packing plant. You as an individual packer, as an individual producer, when GIPSA brings that case against the packer for weighing your livestock incorrectly, we bring that administratively for livestock and can assess a penalty, and we don't have to show competitive injury. So that's the Department's longstanding position. There are some cases where you do have to show competitive injury, some cases of unfair practices, and that may be a situation where a packer is working also as a dealer, and there's a lack of competition in that practice. So that's the longstanding position, and then the intent of this rule was to clarify that longstanding position.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Elmers, and would like to thank the Secretary for taking the time to be here, you as well, Mr. Christensen. If the committee members have any other questions, if you'd submit them, I'm sure the Secretary would be happy to answer some of those.
Mr. Chairman, would I be allowed to just make a few maybe closing remarks?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just wanted to emphasize this administration is committed to helping small businesses, and we strongly do support transparency, fairness, and equity in the marketplace. The proposed rule that we discussed today, it's a starting point. We received over 60,000 comments, and I want everyone to know that we're listening. We're taking these comments very seriously. No option is being ruled out, and we will let these comments guide us to develop a final product. And I want to emphasize to you, Mr. Chairman of the committee, that I have spent a career working with small businesses. After leaving the farm, I had the opportunity to work with many farmers, many ranchers, all family operations, to develop markets in Mexico for cattle and sheep, to develop markets in China for pecans, develop domestic markets in 28 different states for chili peppers and onions. So I really, really feel connected to small businessmen, feel connected to farmers and ranchers. And I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for all the work that you do for small businesses, for your commitment.
I'd now like to yield to Congressman King for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your deference. I have a markup going on in another committee, and I'm afraid I have to slip out. But I wanted to have the opportunity to introduce Mr. Gary Malinke. He's a constituent of mine from Sioux Center, Iowa, and I'll say the center of the #1 pork-producing congressional district in America. He's the CEO of Natural Food Holdings, which was formerly known as the Supreme Packing Company, and that's also located in Sioux Center, Iowa. Gary graduated from Northwest Iowa Technical College in 1985 with an associate degree in agribusiness. After 2 years in the livestock and feed business and 1 year at Iowa Beef Packers, Gary joined Supreme Packing Company. And while at the company, he held positions starting with hog buyer, then head of livestock procurement and community sales. And in 2001, he became the president of the company. And he's currently serving as chairman of the North American Meat Packers Association, and his business is also an active member of the U.S. Meat Export Federation and the National Meat Association. Mr. Malinke's company is a prime example of a kind of a small packing plant that's so important to local communities, the small businesses that we've been talking about in the earlier panel. And the overall industry competitiveness is reflected by his company. It's important that we think about these businesses, Mr. Chairman, especially because when they deal with specialty and niche markets, it's not just large companies. We evaluate rules and see how they affect the small companies as well. So I want to thank Mr. Malinke and the other witnesses for being here to testify today. And I think it's important we turn our ear to the interests of the industry. And I'd point out also that Mr. Malinke's company is, again, from the #1 pork-producing congressional district in America. I couldn't leave that commercial out, Mr. Chairman. I welcome all the witnesses. I thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Malinke, if you'd like to go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. Good morning, Sorry, that's better. Good morning, Chairman Tipton and Ranking Member Kritz. I appreciate this opportunity. As Congressman King said, you know, we're up in Sioux Center, Iowa. Our firm isn't large enough to be classified in the top 10 hog slaughter plants, but nevertheless, we've been in business for over 40 years, and I've had the privilege of being in the meat industry for over 20 years myself. We're proud to have arrangements with a number of producers to bring us hogs that fit various niche markets with whom we have marketing agreements under various brands. And to do this, we're looking for very specific hogs that require growers to follow very specific protocols. Our producers are then paid a premium for meeting these expectations. And these products are then sold into markets, restaurants that differentiate our products to create an enhanced value. To accomplish this, we work with well over 500 growers, many of which are small family farmers. And we do this to really to produce a consistent supply of product to our customers. And I'm sensitive to the feelings in the countryside that producers aren't getting a fair deal. You know, I and my senior staff are involved in industry organizations really to give a little and to gain a lot in terms of advice and resources to better help us as business leaders. And indeed, I happen to be the chairman of one of those associations at this time. At a recent meeting that I attended, I visited with a young man who inspired me to reach back to producers and to give back to the men and women, families who produce hogs for our business. I want these producers to know as much about fixing a fair price for pork as they do about the business of raising hogs. A couple suggestions I might have in ways that we can work together. Meeting consumer expectations for pork at retail and or at the center of the plate is critical. I and my organizations can develop better programs to help producers better understand how we can work together. Working together every week of the year for the long haul and better share and communicate with each other what it takes for these programs to be successful in meeting consumer expectations. There's already a great deal of information in the marketplace about the price for hogs and for pig meat. And I'll agree that this can be very complicated. It's not always as accessible and could perhaps use some improvement. But nevertheless, I'm committed to working with the organizations I belong to enhance transparency and information that would be useful to producers. I believe that the enhancements set forth in current legislation would also be helpful. I also know that one of the organizations in which we hold membership has been meeting with USDA's marketing officials to improve the information for specifically pork price reporting. I expect these efforts to be useful in improving the flow of information. I grew up on a small farm myself some 30 years ago and have witnessed firsthand the changes to rural America. There's no longer a hardware store, a grocery store in small towns. Numerous school districts emerged, and the economies of scale have been driven by the Walmarts of the world. This trend is not the fault of big business. It's driven by the changing consumer. Folks like Walmart have done a great job of attracting customers. Face it, thousands of people shop there every day because they choose to do so. As much as I desire to look back with nostalgia, the realities of the economic forces today are very strong. GIPSA's attempt to regulate the future by returning the way that things used to be will be a bad economic decision and will not succeed. In the summer of 2009, our business wasn't very good, and we weren't profitable. Fortunately, this year we're doing much better. And I know it's because of both domestic demand and improved exports. In 2009, the price of hogs were some 30 to 35% lower than in 2010, and we lost money. In 2010, we have this improved demand, and we did much better because of the market conditions, and even in light of the fact that the price of the livestock was higher. And my point is really this. The primary influence of the price of livestock is the demand for the finished products we produce. It's customers coming in the door buying the product. This is a tough business. It's a tough business for producers and for packers. Working together in partnership and cooperation will give us the opportunity to be successful together. I'm not here to cry about the large firms. Their very largeness really denies them the flexibility that we enjoy at Natural Food Holdings. We don't need GIPSA, a government regulatory agency, in our business plan. Enhancing our partnerships with producers for the mutual benefit is a much better solution. And I thank you for allowing me to testify. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Malinky. And as a reminder, you did great. Just in terms of the lights that we have, you'll have 5 minutes for your testimony. And when it gets down to the final minute, the yellow light will come on and then the red light. And if you could summarize after that. I would also like to have the privilege of introducing one of my constituents, Ms. Robbie LaValle from Hotchkiss, Colorado. And I'm sorry the Secretary left because we could talk about Tulia and Hotchkiss for some communities. A lot of folks don't know where they're at. But Ms. LaValle is a beef producer who is past president of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association and a board member of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. She received her bachelor's and Master of Science in Animal Science from Colorado State University. I would certainly like to thank you, Robbie, for being here and taking the time to be here, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Kritz. My name is Robbie LaValle, and I have been a beef producer all of my life, and my 2 boys represent the 4th generation on our ranch. In addition to our ranch, my family and I are co-owners of Homestead Meats, a direct beef marketing business that has been in operation since 1995. There are 6 ranching families who co-own this small business, and we have 13 full-time employees. To enhance our direct marketing beef business, Homestead Meats owns and operates a packing plant regulated by USDA. Therefore, we are producers, feeders, and packers. The proposed GIPSA rule will significantly hinder our small business model, cripple our ability to market our cattle the way we want, and limit consumer choices. As I said, I am a producer on the cow-calf side, and our business is built on relationships and alliances. Throughout the beef chain, for years, we have successfully marketed our calves through an alliance with a packer. That alliance has created a relationship that provides feedback from the packer on the quality of our cattle, quality for which we get paid a premium for. I strongly believe in the fundamental American business tenet of a willing seller and a willing buyer, being able to enter into a private business transaction because it protects my pricing and marketing mechanism. Our cattle marketing contracts are the heart of our small business, the incentive to manage for the future, and the stability for our banking partner. And it does not warrant being posted on the Internet or receiving additional government intervention and oversight or being subject to potential litigation. When the proposed rule bans packer-to-packer sales, the 6 families and Homestead Meats may not be able to sell to other packers. This will substantially reduce the profitability for the rest of our cattle and compromises the alliance we have spent years building. This is a great example of how this rule truly harms producers and processors across the country. For years, USDA has promoted exactly what we are doing: sell direct to the consumer, operate as a small processor in a strategic area of the country, being rewarded for adding value to the end product, and producing local food. We responded to consumer demand. We followed USDA's lead. Now we are being punished. This is a slap in the face to innovative businessmen and women across the U.S. The proposed GIPSA rule offers neither clarity nor clear definition in terminology. Elimination of the competitive injury requirement will provide a disincentive for packer premiums and value-added contracts because of the fear of litigation. The vague definitions such as unfair or reasonable person will open the door to an increased number of lawsuits because mere accusations without economic proof suffice for USDA or an individual to bring a lawsuit against a buyer. Who determines fairness? Does increased government intervention and litigation determine fairness? Arbitrary judgment by GIPSA will only increase paperwork and costs for small business owners like me. Who pays for this increased intervention and litigation? The beef cattle industry does. When costs increase for the packer, the trickle-down effect is to decrease the price paid to ranchers. This will be a trial lawyer's dream and will devastate small businesses such as mine. What will be the consequence when the cost of defending prices paid for my cattle and complying with this rule add to the operating cost? What happens to every other industry when litigation increases? No one takes a risk or sticks their neck out or pays a premium for fear of reprisal. This ends creativity, partnerships, and the desire to take a chance, which is the very basis of the entrepreneurial spirit of the American small business owner. Do we truly want that for the beef industry? The rule will require buyers of my cattle to justify paying a premium for my livestock. What will be the standard for that justification? Who will set it? One size does not fit all. The regulation seems to infer that it is the role of big government, and I strongly oppose the government setting or justifying the premiums paid. This will roll back the clock 30 years and take us back to commodity beef, which consumers have told us they don't want. Value-based marketing has given our family business the opportunity to compete for market share at the highest level. As a result, we have been able to build a small business that supports the local economy and provide consumers with the products they want. We do not need big government setting up shop on our farms and ranches, and government intrusion into the private marketplace is not the answer. I urge the committee to help stop this rule from being finalized, as it is detrimental to ranchers, consumers, and the entire U.S. economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Joel Brandenberger, President of the National Turkey Federation. Mr. Brandenberger joined NTF in 1991 as the Federation's Director of Public Affairs and served in a variety of positions, most recently as Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs before being appointed to his current post in December of 2006. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Brandenberger.
Thank you, Chairman Tipton, Ranking Member Critz, members of the subcommittee. The National Turkey Federation represents all segments of the turkey industry, including growers, processors, breeders, hatchery owners, and allied industry. NTF appreciates the opportunity to testify because our members believe GIPSA's proposed marketing rule will harm the many small businesses that play a vital role in producing more than 5 billion pounds of ready-to-cook turkey meat in the United States. A decade ago, our leadership recognized the need to develop comprehensive policy on legislation and regulation that could affect the grower-processor relationship. We formed a special committee of growers and processors that spent 6 months developing policy that was unanimously approved by our Board of Directors. The policy calls on NTF to support legislation or regulation that helps all parties better understand the nature of the contract they are entering into. We supported the 2009 GIPSA rule that enhanced transparency in contracts and permitted growers to discuss a proposed contract with financial and legal advisors as well as business partners. But NTF strongly objects to any proposed law or rule that would insert the government into the negotiating process by dictating specific terms of compensation or excessively limiting the ability of either party to manage their financial risk. Our members believe this is exactly what the current GIPSA rule would do. The rule fails to grasp the diversity of today's turkey industry. Turkeys are processed by family-owned companies, grower-owned cooperatives, and large, diversified international companies. 10 of the 25 turkey processors in this country meet SBA's definition of a small business. But small business plays a bigger role in the industry as well. A significant percentage of the more than 8,000 family farms that raise turkeys are, in fact, small businesses, employing staffs in some cases as large as 250 people. Some of these family-owned small businesses are also part of the 7 grower-owned cooperatives that produce turkey in this country. All of them understand the critical importance of maintaining a strong business relationship between growers and processors. About 80% of the turkeys today are produced under the traditional production contract, where the company owns the turkeys, provides the feed, the veterinary care, and the grower provides the housing and their expertise. Another 10% are produced under marketing contracts, where the grower owns the birds, provides the feed, the veterinary care, as well as the housing and expertise, and sells to the processor at a previously contracted price. In both of those cases, growers' compensation can vary according to specific terms in the contract. The remaining 10% of turkeys are raised on company-owned farms. I want to highlight 3 aspects of the rule that create enormous potential problem for today's industry. The first is the competitive injury provision that's been talked about quite a bit here. The second is the provision that would require processors to virtually guarantee a grower can recoup 80% of their capital investments. And the third is a series of provisions, which the previous witness discussed, that would discourage competitive contracts and reduce the premiums or deductions that growers can receive based on the performance of the birds in their care. Taken together, these provisions create significant new legal and regulatory risk for turkey processors. And as processors seek to manage that risk, there could be serious unintended consequences. The most obvious is that contracts will become less competitive and compensation more uniform. Those farmers, large and small, who are doing an outstanding job in receiving premiums will justifiably feel cheated as a new regulation forces everyone to a lower common denominator. The bigger impact may come later. As processors seek to minimize their risk, one conceivable option would be to grow more turkeys on fewer farms, eliminating production on all, or limiting or reducing production on all but the best performing farms. Processors could also increase the number of turkeys grown on company-owned farms. An excellent example of unintended consequences comes from a grower member who testified last week before the Senate Agriculture Committee. His family farm is one of 16 that owns a processing cooperative in the upper Midwest. This co-op is hoping to expand over the next few years. Some of the expansion can be covered by increasing the number of turkeys grown on the existing farms. But ultimately, they believe that contracting with other farmers may be the only route they have to the expansion they envision. They have said if this rule takes effect, they believe the risk will be too large and it will limit their expansion. So the irony in this is rich. We have growers who feel that a rule allegedly designed to empower them will in fact ultimately stifle their ability to grow and create new jobs. What is especially frustrating is what's been discussed here already at length. USDA proposed this rule without conducting an adequate assessment of its economic impact. Study funded by NTF found an economic impact of $360 million to our industry alone. Others have shown impacts in other industries as large as $1 billion over 5 years and a $14 billion reduction in the gross domestic product. USDA now has agreed to an economic assessment, as we've heard, but as we've also heard, there's no commitment yet to open it for comment after it's completed. In order for there to be any level of confidence that this final rule really is going to promote the best interest of family farmers and their small businesses, it is essential that this economic analysis be submitted for public comment before the rule is finalized. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to yield now to Ranking Member Kritz to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob Junk. Mr. Junk is the Local Economy Manager for FAPEN Economic Development Council, a nonprofit organization aimed at increasing jobs and quality of life in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, which ranks usually either the second or third or first poorest county in Pennsylvania. As a local economy manager, he develops marketing plans to bring awareness to surrounding farms and build regional business networks. Bob has a degree in business agriculture from Penn State University and has extensive experience with farm operations. Once owned a 10-acre strawberry farm with 15 employees and has managed a large dairy operation in Uniontown. Mr. Junk also has 40-plus years of working on sustainable farm policy at the state and federal level. He has served as the state president of the Pennsylvania Farmers Union for 10 years and has served on numerous committees and boards representing the interests of small farmers. Welcome, Mr. Junk.
Thank you very much, Congressman Kritz, and it's my honor to be here today, and I thank the opportunity to bring testimony here in support of the GIPSA's proposed rules. Chairman Tipton, Ranking Member Kritz, and subcommittee members, my name is Bob Junk. As the Congressman mentioned, I am the Local Economy Manager for FAPEN Economic Development Council. I'm going to summarize my testimony in lieu of time because there's no way I know because of all the issues that we are supporting and that these proposed rules are addressing. So I would like to start out, though, by stating that our mission at FAPEN is to maintain and increase employment opportunities / jobs in Fayette County in an effort to improve the quality of life for all of its residents. And again, it's all of our residents that we are focused on. And agriculture is a main part of our local economy. And so with that, today we've heard a lot of information and a lot of numbers thrown around. And I'd really like to start out with the fact that to date, we have lost 1.5 million beef and hog producers over the last 30 years. So I think we have a problem when we are looking at losing that many producers that are small business owners out of our local economy. They are reinvesting those dollars locally. They are creating the opportunity for small business entrepreneurs. They're also creating the opportunity for local reinvestment into the neighborhoods, communities, and also into our public schools and so on. So with that, we talk a lot about regulation, government. We don't want big government. But when we take a look at really what the GIPSA rules are geared to, and we could go right back to the Farm Bill, and it was a directive through the Farm Bill, and we all had an opportunity to debate and negotiate and vote on the Farm Bill, which was approved 3 years ago, that this regulation is to be looked at to look how we can bring balance to the market for the producers. For many, many years, producers have been faced with a number of challenges. Being a producer a number of years ago, those challenges have not changed much. I'm from a small rural community. We have lost a lot of our stockyards, our local packers, because of consolidation and mergers, and has created even more of a hindrance to get access. But what I'm going to talk about a little bit right now at this point in time is the fact that a lot of our producers today are being forced to do certain upgrades to their operations to be able to receive contracts. And a lot of times these contracts, and especially in poultry, are only 6 to 8 weeks long. But at the same time, they're forced into taking a 30-year mortgage to be able to do these upgrades. Knowing that, again, farmers have limited ability to access credit, and they are not usually able to access the same type of credit that normal small business operations have, or businesses. They're sometimes forced into taking alternative credit measures. And it forces them to be then relying on, hopefully, getting new contracts. This proposal will actually give the producers some compensation if as long as they continue to meet those obligations with the processors. Contract terminations, we have a serious problem with processors being able to just eliminate contracts with producers. This proposal would give the opportunity for those producers to capture at least 80% of their investment from those individuals and those processors. The other issue I'd like to talk about, and it's really key, is the issue of the ranking payment system in base of assumption that all growers are provided comparable inputs and varieties of performance as a result in farm management. A lot of times what will happen today is farmers are just there for the management and the building, as you heard in previous hearing or previous witness, and they're carrying the risks, and there's really no way of them being able to make that relationship to what they're being paid and how they can just truly balance the price that they are actually being paid by those companies. And then the other issue I'd like to also bring up is in relationship to that, the company can still pay bonuses on top of what they pay to the producers. This does not restrict them from being able to pay premiums to performance. This is not in any way restricting niche markets to be able to pay a farmer for any of the added premiums that again could be passed on or that the consumers are requesting from the marketplace. I want to make that perfectly clear that there is no restriction from that. With that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify here, and I will be ready for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll now begin our questioning, and I'd like to start with Ms. LaValle. Under the proposed rule with packer-to-packer affiliates, there would be a ban in terms of the selling. In your case, that would be very problematic, obviously, since you have a producer-owned packaging plant and also produce livestock. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to sell livestock to your own packing plant. What would that mean for your business?
Well, we could continue to sell to our own packing plant. Our 6 families market about a third of the cattle through the homestead meats, through the packing plant that we own. But what it would hinder is our ability to sell to another packer. Mm-hmm. That's what it would hinder. So our other 2/3 of all the families, of the 6 families, would then be restricted in who they could market their cattle to. It takes buyers out of the market. And again, that would be a detriment to producers across the economy, especially us and other packing cooperatives, premium beef, Oregon country beef, all of those that are in a similar situation.
You know, you mentioned in your testimony that this is going to create new paperwork and increase costs. Do you have any idea how much this is going to increase your costs?
When we've looked at the proposed regulation, again, we have 13 employees. Now, that does not consider all the 6 families. And certainly that's a great question. We have not done an in-depth analysis to say that it was going to cost us another $2 a hundredweight or anything like that. We do know that it would take another half-time person to comply with this regulation. That's approximately $30,000 to $40,000 additional to our operating cost for our packing plant, and we only, again, have 13 employees to begin with.
So you're a wealthy small business. You can afford that, surely.
We operate on a pretty slim margin.
I know you do. So, as you pointed out in your testimony, Ms. LaValle, that for years the federal government has pushed farmers and livestock operators to become more actively involved in value-added downstream economic activities as a means of being extreme. It seems to be problematic since you're a producer-owned packing plant and also produce livestock. Really, sorry, I got lost on my paper here. In terms of going downstream, are you going to be able to maximize the value of your business? Is this going to be hitting you in the pocketbook and possibly creating job loss for you if this rule goes through?
Again, when I look at the in-depth analysis of this proposed regulation, and Mr. Chairman, I look at the unintended consequences, and I don't, yes, it has an impact on our business. Yes, it has an impact on our 6 families and our 6 ranches, but it also has a huge impact on the beef industry across whether it's just our area or across the country. Again, increased government intervention, increased potential litigation. All of these factors have a trickle-down effect to where there is a reduction in the price and an increase in the operating cost. And again, in this era of very slim margin, increased cost and decreased revenue is never good for any producer of any size, whether it's small, medium, or large.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Malinke, you mentioned in your testimony that you have arrangements with a number of producers that raise hogs for niche markets, which requires producers to follow a very specific growing protocol. If the GIPSA rule is implemented as written, do you feel that an incentive exists for these producers to undertake the added expense in following these protocols, and if they aren't guaranteed a premium for the added value?
Clearly these growers aren't going to raise pigs with the protocol that really ultimately these consumers have set forth. In other words, it's the consumer saying, hey, this is what we want and this is why we want it. So it's flowing backwards. And if they're not assured of a premium, they simply won't do it.
Do you feel that by guaranteeing every producer base pay, that the quality of livestock available to consumers, that will decrease? Is that what I'm hearing?
I believe it would be that case, definitely.
Great. Mr. Brandenberger, you mentioned in your testimony a provision in the proposed rule that would allow a grower to recover 80% of the cost of the required capital investment. Do you think that given the margins, small integrators may find it difficult to make such assurances?
I think that's a potential problem. I mean, in reality, in the overwhelming majority of the cases, that investment in our industry, at least, is going to be recouped and then some. It's going to happen. Usually for new growers, fairly long-term contracts are offered. We have relatively small turnover rates among our growers. It's the problem of once you put that risk in writing on the line, you assume that risk by guaranteeing it. In essence, that's part of your contracts. How do the lenders? How do the people that help finance the companies, our industry, how are they going to look at that? How is that going to affect their ability, their willingness to make some investments that are going to be important? And for our companies, at that point, if you're going to offer these guarantees in writing, that's part of your business obligation. Which growers are you going to choose to do that with? And do you start making some very hard decisions that may affect some growers whose performance is far from poor, but who may not meet the criteria necessary to survive in this new higher risk world?
So it'll impact smaller growers.
Smaller growers, or and growers that for whom the investment might be a bigger stretch and may have a little bit larger risk because of a variety of factors. Yes, that's what concerns growers a little bit, is what's going to happen when my contract's renewed. They want to make this investment. If this is a guarantee, where am I going to fall in that new world?
Okay, great. And Mr. Junk, in your testimony, it indicates that you agree with GIPSA in their proposal to remove the tournament pay system for poultry contractors. Smaller growers raise their flocks to meet certain requirements using different diet formulas and creating a niche market for their unique birds. If the growers know that they're going to be receiving the same base pay as another grower who doesn't follow the same requirements, these birds that could be of a lesser quality, where's the incentive for growers to continue to grow and produce these consumer-driven birds?
Well, like I was saying, number one, they can...
Want to hit your microphone, please? Thanks.
Well, first off, the contractors can still pay premiums and for better quality or better performing animals. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But could you repeat the last part of that question that you asked?
Yeah, what it is, where is the incentive for growers to continue to produce the consumer-driven birds?
Well, right now, as far as the small producers, because I think you were making a relationship to the smaller producers at the same time. Right now, the smaller producer doesn't have a lot of options in the first place because he's already being penalized. Secondly, in the poultry industry, most of the birds and the feed is already owned by the contractor. The farmer's basically providing the building which the birds are housed in.
But they're all receiving the same base pay. Going off.
Yes, and so what I'm trying to do is defend or define why we're supporting a base pay structure versus whatever the contractor wants to pay. I mean, the bottom line right now, it's a take it or leave it contract. If you, as the poultry grower, is sitting there with a 30-year mortgage after you made the improvements, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there saying, okay, it's time to renew the contract, and here's what we're going to pay for the birds or for your production on the birds, but you don't have the opportunity to negotiate the price, who's setting the market then? And that comes back to, what is the real value of that bird? And how does the producer have the opportunity to determine that without being able to negotiate with that contractor in a good, faithful way? Any other contracts, we have the opportunities to, if we feel that we've been unduly adjusted as far as fairness or whatnot, the ability to negotiate or
do you see, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is where you have the same base pay that's going to be put into place. I'm having a hard time really understanding that distinction. Shouldn't there be?
There's still value to that bird. I mean, it's just like in the cattle industry. I may have a different size hog or a heavier hog versus an ideal hog. I could have a steer that is the ideal weight and the ideal size, and it might be the ideal breed that doesn't have the big bone where you're going to have a lot of waste. But that animal is still valued at the same base price. It's at the same starting number. Whatever, it's still there. It still has that value. That's what we're trying to say is make it more balanced on that base price. If it's a higher quality animal, pay the premium. Nobody's saying that they can't. But we want to know as a grower, what is that base price going to be when we're starting to enter into these contracts? And then it should not be penning one producer against another producer.
Okay. Mr. Brandenberger, do you have some comments maybe?
Well, there's one thing that's mentioned a lot, and I know Mr. Junk hears it a lot from the people he talks to, is the question of inputs. And you sometimes hear talk about there are the poults, which are our baby turkeys or chicks that they receive of varying qualities. Now, a live animal isn't something you can rubber stamp, but in the turkey industry at least, an important thing to know is that the genetic lines are managed almost entirely by two primary breeders that operate in the United States. They're the ones that produce the genetic lines that the processors use. They spend tens of millions of dollars to create as much uniformity between each poult that's delivered as do the hatchery owners who hatch the poults and get them out there. Their businesses suffer if the processors start seeing that any percentage of these poults are substandard, aren't performing. And there's no percentage in sending substandard poults onto any farm because with the high feed costs we have today, and we could talk about other government policies, but we'll let it go for this point. With the high feed costs we have today, no processor is going to continue buying and sourcing poults and sending them to growers if they're not getting maximum feed efficiency off of that birds. So there's already an enormous economic disincentive for any substandard poult to be delivered to any farm with any degree of regularity.
Okay, great. Just follow up one other question there, Mr. Junk. In terms of your organization, do you have any fears that the competitive injury provisions in the rule, along with provisions banning the use of tournament systems to rank growers and the requirements that growers recoup their investment in new barns and housing, will lead to some processors restricting all their future contract buying only to the most successful growers, or even doing all of their own growing in-house, reducing the number of opportunities for other growers, including beginning growers?
Was you saying fairs?
Yeah. No, when we're talking about the competitive injury provisions in the rule,
okay,
is this going to be restricting some of these opportunities for growers to be able to develop and actually closing down the market?
Myself personally, no. I don't think it will. If anything, it gives, again, the producers the opportunity to have an opportunity to identify and be able to access justice for their probable cause. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I do not see this causing any problems within the industry. As far as the producers, for the last, I was president of the Pennsylvania Farmers Union back in the late 80s and 90s. And these are some of the same problems that we had back then that we've been trying to address and bring concerns to. The consolidation of the industry today has been growing bigger and bigger. And our concern is no different than any other industry's concern. When does it get too big to fail? And right now, what we're looking at is make sure we have a fair, balanced opportunity to access the market and provide competitive pricing.
Okay, thank you. I'd like now to yield to Ranking Member Kritz for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And because of time is running short, I actually only have one question, but I do have a second question that came to light, because I'm not sure if it was you, Mr. Malenke, or you, Mrs. LaValle, that talked about a one-size-fits-all. And what we do at the Federal level, we do two things very well: one-size-fits-all, and two, mandate. We do a lot of mandating and push it down to states, who then have to figure out how to pay for it. But you talked about the packer-to-packer sales, and I understand in reading through the ruling, or not the ruling, but what they're talking about is that I guess there's a possibility that packer-to-packer sales is being used to affect prices, and that's why they're talking about it. But I'm curious if there is a solution where it can protect against using packer-to-packer sales to influence pricing and not impact what you're doing, which is at a smaller level. I mean, is there a way that maybe at a size, if the rule said, well, we're going to exempt smaller packers from this rule, or is there something that you see as a possible issue or a possible solution? Both or either one of you.
Just from the pork side, today the pork industry operates under mandatory reporting of live animals. And packer-to-packer sales are reported there, but they're in a separate bucket. So in other words, they're clearly defined, separate from other livestock.
Okay. Okay.
And you know, my experience as a packer buying hogs from another packer is, hey, the only reason I bought them was because it was the most attractive deal I could get.
Right.
Purely a pure business decision.
Okay.
And again, similar for beef. One size fits all, again, does not take into account the inherent variation across whether you're Utah or Colorado or the East. It doesn't take in that inherent variation or the significant difference, the significant miles between markets, all of that, the weight variation, the different environments, the operating, all of that. So to say that we could make a size threshold and, again, try to put that on an industry will have the same trickle-down effect of decreasing the actual price paid to the rancher, as you've mentioned earlier. That is the person at the bottom of the ladder, and all the way up through the beef chain. So, similar to the pork as far as the reporting, size threshold would have a similar impact of ratcheting down the price paid.
Okay. Well, that's and I mean, I'm showing my lack of knowledge about your industries, and that's why I'm trying to learn this so that we can work together to come up with a stand when we're talking to the USDA about what is the best way forward and what our stand is going to be. Now, Mr. Malinke, you made a comment about Walmart being successful. Now, so you know where I stand. I'm not. I don't buy into the Walmart model because, and I'm going to give you a very specific example, is that there have been several times where my wife has gone to Walmart because I live in a rural part of Pennsylvania and there's no other stores left. They've driven pretty much everyone else out of business. So you go to Walmart, she goes to buy the thing that she wants, and Walmart doesn't carry it anymore because they have demanded a price from the producer, and the producer can't meet that price, so they drop them from their shelves. So I have just a little bit of heartburn about how that operates. I think you're limiting your choices. The other hat I wear in this Congress is I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and we've seen a consolidation of industry. And consolidation is not always good, because if you have a problem, if you only have one company or two companies are doing it, you've got some issues. So you know where I stand in the question I'm going to come up with is that many times what happens to congressmen is people come into our offices and say, we've got a problem, you need to fix it. So then we push back, and that's what happened with this Farm Bill and with GIPSA, is that people were coming in saying there's a problem. So I'm going to ask every one of you to answer this, and we'll go right, your left to right, my right to left, as what do you think, what drove this ruling or this revisiting of this GIPSA rule? What do you think caused that? Is it just belly aching by some small farmers and that enough people gained some steam? Is there a real issue out there? And if this revision isn't the answer, do you have any ideas? Or I'm sure your industries have sent comments in, 60,000 comments. Obviously, producers and the industry has come in. What do you think the solution might be? Or do you think there really isn't a problem and that we should just leave it as is? And that's my only question, Mr. Chairman. So, Mrs. LaValle, if you would start, and then we'll just work across.
Thank you, Mr. Kritz. You bring up an interesting question, and it's a question that we have thought about. You heard over and over that the age on this rule and that the industry has evolved. When you look at the proposed regulation, though, and you look back at what you put forward in the 2008 Farm Bill, this regulation has overreach, and it has went beyond the 2008 Farm Bill. And so, again, the unintended consequences, the not having the clear economic analysis that has been fully vetted and looked at by USDA, and I know that they said they are continuing to work on it.
I'm just going to interrupt you for one second. I don't want to know what you think about what USDA is doing. What I want to know is, do you think there is an issue? And is there something that USDA should be doing to address it?
And again, as I was starting to say, when you look at the unintended consequences of this proposed regulation, this does not address, this does not put more ranchers back in rural America. This does not put more sale barns back in small towns. So, no, this regulation, this proposed regulation does not take us where they want us to be. And no, this regulation should be shelved. Go back to the 2008. But this regulation should be shelved.
I don't believe that the issue comes down to economics. As I mentioned in my testimony, I mean, I grew up on a small farm. I love the small farm atmosphere, et cetera, but the forces of economics are simply against smallness. smallness, you literally have to differentiate yourself in order to be competitive, because like I say, those economic forces are huge. And face it, that's the way the world has become, and I used Walmart as that example. Is there anything USDA can really do about it? I don't know. I don't know what it would be. Encouraging producers to differentiate themselves, get into different markets, or you have to, what's the old saying? If you can't beat them, you got to join them. Not great choices in some cases. I fully understand, and I sympathize for those that are faced with those decisions. But that's the world we're in.
It is good. It is a very good question, and I would say a couple of things. One, in any business relationship, it's not always going to be smooth sailing. Got 3 people who work for me in here, and they might not always say the best things about me. There are concerns, there are grumbles that occur from time to time. But in our industry, it would be hard to see how the growers would feel that they don't have an opportunity for empowerment. 4 of the last 5 new business entities to enter the processing in the turkey industry have been grower-owned cooperatives. They have been able to empower themselves. In fact, 2 of them would tell you the biggest problem they had was the paperwork at USDA to get a loan guarantee that they needed for their financing. Another situation in your home state, about 5 or 6 years ago, a group of growers weren't happy with the deal they had from the processor closest to them. They formed a cooperative. They decided not to go into the processing end of the business, but with this cooperative, they went to a processor in another state, which was still close enough for the transportation to make sense, and cut a better deal for themselves. I think they felt very empowered by what they were able to do for themselves as a group. So, in terms of what we'd recommend about where the rule overreached, I think if GIPSA started just by going back and adhering more closely to what was in the last Farm Bill, that would probably be, an important step forward.
Of course, I support the proposed rules, and I support moving forward into the process. We all know that there's been over 60-some thousand comments being made, and we don't know what all those comments mean and how USDA is going to respond to it. So right now we're commenting on a proposed rule that is not a final rule, and we believe that in order to really see what USDA is really going to implement without going to the final rule, part of that procedure, we don't know. When I say we're members of NSAC, developed a letter and sent to each of the members, and it's attached to my testimony of an additional 143 other organizations from all over the country supporting moving this into the next level, because we don't know what the actual outcome is going to be here. Yeah, we had comments. We submitted comments also. So we don't know what comments are going to get picked up, what's not going to be picked up. Also, Farm Bureau, American Farm Bureau, National Farmers Union, both have submitted letters saying, let's take it to the final rulemaking. Let's see what the, just to throw the baby out with the bathwater at this point in time, the Farm Bill directed it. Both the President, the Senate, and the House, all 3 of those chambers approved the Farm Bill. It's in the Farm Bill. And this was approved under the Bush administration. So let's finish it out. Let's get the final rule out, and let's see what actually is going to be the end result. A lot of these comments, 60,000 comments, is coming from producers. It's coming from producer groups. It's coming from co-ops. It's coming from general farm organizations. It's coming from processors. So let's take it to the next level. Let's continue the process, and let's see what the final rules are going to be like.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate, and that's what, this is all about perspective, and I appreciate you offering that, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Omers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our panelists for being here today and discussing this very important issue. Mr. Malenke, I have a question for you in regard to the USDA, the rule, basically, and the approval of the contract terms after a sale has actually been completed. And I'm wondering if you have concerns in relation to that. Obviously, that puts a little more cost and difficulty to you because you're having to deal with that up front. Do you think that there may be a chance that packers will withhold part of their contract payment until they get the contract approved by USDA? Is that a possibility, or what are your thoughts on that?
We're regulated under Packer and Stockyards today to make payments within 24 hours or the next business day, okay? You know, how packers may look at those contracts in the future, you know, it's a little hard to tell. I mean, face it, I can only assume that they're not going to want to take on extra burden or feel as if, gee, I, you know, have this potential bullseye after me because now I'm in this contract. So there may likely be incentive to do less contracting.
If with some of the portion of the payment was withheld, what would that do to your business and your cash flow?
Well, obviously I don't own the livestock. I'm paying for the livestock, and you know, face it, paying for it within 24 hours from the time of delivery or from the time of processing, my money turns really fast. So
it would just extend everything out.
Well, basically, I'd get to use someone else's cash, which I don't think that's. I don't really think that's the intent.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Mr. Junk, I have a question for you too. You state in your testimony that the GIPSA proposed rule will also help hog producers. Can you elaborate on that further? How do you feel in particular that this will help our hog farmers?
Well, part of it is under the ranking. It'll give them also the opportunity to be able to get a base price and out of the market or out of the contractor. The other issue would also give them the opportunity to be able to, if they feel that they've not been treated right within the contract, the ability to be able to go to litigation and be able to have an opportunity to have a trial by jury hearing if so desired.
Do you feel that the hog producers will benefit from every provision that's being put forward in the proposed rule that has the effects on all of the swine industry?
I don't think across the board different provisions will have different impacts in different livestock segments. So all the provisions that are being proposed, will they have an impact in the hog production or a hog producer? No. But will there be some benefits? Yes.
What would you say in your assessment would be some of the negative effects that might occur?
Negative, I couldn't honestly tell you at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you, Congressman Elmers. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to be able to participate today. As this subcommittee continues to focus on burdensome regulations that affect small businesses, I would like to once again encourage the USDA to take into consideration all of the testimony and questions that we've heard here today as they work through their economic analysis. I'd also like to encourage the USDA to revise their analysis on small businesses as part of the more detailed economic analysis currently underway. After that, the USDA should publish the new regulatory flexibility analysis for comment to ensure small businesses that they can have input and can inform the agency on its effects on their businesses. Again, thanks to all of our witnesses for being here today, and I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record.